Hello everyone and welcome to the introductory episode of my playthrough of the Final Fantasy XII Randomizer. In this episode I want to give you a brief overview of the randomizer itself, as well as the settings that I will be using throughout the playthrough. Also, please keep in mind that this video is not supposed to serve as a fully fledged tutorial for the randomizer, though I will go into detail and explain what all of these settings do, at least based on my understanding of things. The randomizer that I am using for this is the Final Fantasy XII randomizer by Bards24. This randomizer is not to be mistaken with the Final Fantasy XII Open World randomizer, also developed by Bards24. The randomizer I am using is the older discontinued one, yet I'm still using it because the latter is, as of recording of this video, still in a beta state and apparently still lacks some features this one has. If you want to give it a shot as well, you can find links to both the old randomizer as well as the open world randomizer, along with plenty of other relevant resources in the video description. Please bear in mind that I will be using the Steam version of Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age, which I can confirm works, but I am not sure about the Microsoft Store version of the game. Also consider that Nexus requires you to create an account to download mods. Furthermore, in case you also decide to use the older FF12 randomizer like me, I recommend you do not install it via the Vortex mod manager, but rather download and unzip it manually. This is important because the randomizer is a separate program, which the mod manager cannot start. Anyways, if you finally manage to start the randomizer executable, this is what the randomizer should look like. Since the randomizer contains a wide variety of settings, it offers different kinds of settings presets for an easy setup. Starting from the top, these become increasingly more chaotic. The preset that I chose as a base is the controlled random one, which is also the recommended one. By selecting that one you are basically good to go, but I made some small adjustments to tweak the experience to my liking. I will specify where. And before I go into detail, I want to draw attention to the flex string at the top of the window. What seems to be gibberish in here is actually a representation of the settings the randomizer uses. In the video description will be a link to a paste bin which depicts a detailed breakdown of all of my settings you will be seeing here. That paste bin should also contain the flex string that corresponds to the settings laid out there. Meaning, by copying that string and pasting it into the flex string field in the randomizer, you should be able to instantly get all of my settings into the randomizer without having to adjust every single option yourself. Then, if you want to take it a step further and want to play the exact randomizer as I do, copy and paste my seed as well. With that out of the way, let's try to understand what all of these settings even do. The first set of randomizer settings is related to music. Pretty simple, you can randomize the music that plays in areas and cutscenes and stuff. The smart setting guarantees that music is randomized based on type. Like Rabanastre gets calm music and the deserts get more desert-themed music. The most interesting feature is the ability to include entirely new tracks not part of Final Fantasy XII. This is done via a specific music pack you can download at the same location where you did download the randomizer. It includes 5 pieces of music from all mainline Final Fantasy titles and even several spin-offs. One thing I'm not sure about is your ability to also insert your own music separate from the offered music pack. Mostly because the file extension of the music in the music pack is nothing standard like .mp3, .ogg or .midi or whatever. Instead, the extensions seem to reference the type of the specific track leading back to the smart randomized music setting. Like the extensions are .town or .desert, sometimes even multiple ones like .forest, .dungeon. I am not sure whether or not you would be able to just change the extension of any audio file to fit into this naming scheme and by doing so create your own music pack that way. Never tried it, but the pack by Bards24 should suffice. Moving on to equipment, things become slightly more complicated. The first setting here randomizes the equipment costs. Smart bases the cost on the actual usefulness of the equipment, instead of assigning arbitrary prices. This is also the first setting that has a phrasing like X% completely random value based on something. The help button in the lower right corner gives you an explanation of how these work. To be honest, I wasn't really able to wrap my head around how these ultimately work, and the way it is phrased makes me think that using the equipment prices as a basis here, the prices are generally based on usefulness, yet there's always this 5% chance that a piece of equipment doesn't follow this scheme and instead costs whatever. However, the help window here seems to explain it differently, as if the percentage in those cases acts more like a positive or negative variance of some kind. Maybe I'm just misinterpreting stuff. If you can clarify this, please tell me in the comments below, since there are multiple settings that work this way. Because I wasn't 100% sure what the percentage does in such cases, I relied mostly on the controlled random preset to do the heavy lifting. The next few settings are concerning equipment stats. All have the smart setting enabled, meaning that weapons and armors do have random stats without it going out of hand. It basically adds or subtracts values within a predefined range, based on the equipment's original stats, preventing stuff like the initial equipment suddenly becoming the strongest in the entire game. Thus, it maintains a sense of constant progression throughout the playthrough, while still allowing some leeway for potential equipment tier rearrangements. It pretty much sums up the controlled random preset as well as my intention for this randomizer. A kind of normal playthrough, neither becoming too easy or difficult, spiced up by the random nature of things, hopefully leaning to fun, interesting and/or challenging scenarios. Especially in a turn-based RPG, I find this approach to be more reasonable, since it's basically all about the numbers and letting those loose most likely results in utter chaos, which might be fun for a few moments but becomes dull pretty quickly. Followed by the equipment stats are the equipment's elemental and status effect properties. This is something I changed. I made it so that there is a 20% chance for each additional element/status. Normally that chance is 0, but that would prevent equipment that does not have any elemental or status properties to get them randomly assigned. Short example. With 0%, the normal standard dagger wouldn't be able to get any elemental on hit properties, while the flame tongue, for example, which normally already has fire on hit, would get shuffled and maybe get water elemental instead. Now with 20%, the dagger would have a 20% chance to get a randomly chosen element on hit, say ice for example, while the flame tongue's initial element would get 100% shuffled, and there would also be a 20% chance that it gets another element on top of that. Since it says 20% for each additional element, there's potentially the chance that a weapon gets all elements on hit, though the chance for each additional element gets increasingly less likely, because you need to hit it 1 in 5 chance over and over again. All of this does not only apply to on-hit elements, but to immunities, absorptions, etc. as well. Status effects work analogously, with the added caveat that the chance for on-hit statuses to proc gets randomized too. Concluding the equipment section of the randomizer, there are settings for shuffling equipment's special effects, like the Genji armor's increased counter chance and attribute bonuses. I bumped up the range for the randomization of attribute bonus values because I felt like it. Pay attention that it says multiplies or divides by value between x and y, meaning with 1.5 as upper threshold it can be 50% stronger but only 1/3 weaker at max. Dividing by 1.5 isn't cutting the value in half. And lastly, there are 2 so-called challenge flags. Those can be interesting if you intend to do special challenge playthroughs. You could also leave all other randomizer settings off and only activate challenge flags you like if you want to create a vanilla playthrough with added restrictions. No armors and no accessories go against the idea of this kind of randomizer however, so I left them off. Still, it is nice that they are an option. Good, and that's it for the equipment portion of the randomizer. I know that was a lot to digest, but since most of the randomizer's main principles are established now, the rest should go a bit faster, which takes me to the items. Everything here is basically about different item costs. Consumables and related items are based on their usefulness, while loot is commonly worth around 500 gil. Both are set to 5% completely random. I did turn off randomized gambit costs because I generally don't like it not to have access to all gambits as soon as possible. Keeping the standard prices ensures I can get them without complications. Challenge flag here as well. You can play without items if you want. The abilities tabs is fairly interesting. Right off the bat, there is the option to randomize the usable magic. This is very unique because the randomizer actually adds completely new magics to the game, which can randomly replace other spells. A lot of these are based on other Final Fantasy games. For example, you could get the Earth Elemental Quake line of spells, stuff like Deprotect and Deshell, or more high-level stuff like Meteor or Freeze. Some of the new spells have also been used in other Final Fantasy XII mods, like the aforementioned Quake and Struggle for Freedom. It is important to note that the randomizer will not add all of the available spells to the game, because there's a limit on how many can be in the game. Ultimately, it is more about shuffling than making new additions. It could also mean that you end up with only fire and never get the respective Ra and Gar spells, so keep that in mind. The smart setting here again ensures a sense of progression, making sure you're getting progressively stronger magics along the way. It also makes sure to replace magics based on types. Ergo, no crossovers between white and black magics, for instance. Following the base magic randomization are, similar to the equipment, randomized options concerning various parameters of all abilities. These settings will affect pretty much all abilities the player has access to, not only magics. I left everything as is and on smart, again to prevent stuff from going haywire. Stuff should be self-explanatory by this point. Near the bottom are also options that affect enemy abilities specifically. The first two settings randomize elemental and status effect properties of enemy abilities, respectively, and function exactly the same as within the equipment section. I increased the chance for both to 10%. I turned randomizing enemy abilities off, since that is a little bit too random for my taste. Enemies in the game are usually thought out as they are. Randomizing their abilities can result in enemies doing nonsensical stuff, like casting oil when they and no enemies nearby have fire attacks. Even like this, some twists might still occur, because enemy abilities' elemental and status properties are still randomized. Concluding the abilities tab, there is the option to randomize the traps in the game, which sounds like fun, as well as 2 challenge flags at the bottom. The character tab opens with a funny feature. Swap characters around sounds super wacky, since it basically shuffles the characters and guests around. Like Penelo can become Van, or when Larsa joins he actually turns out to be Redders, stuff like that. I was tempted to activate this, but as the randomizer points out, it might be buggy, so I opted to resist the urge. Otherwise, there's nothing too spectacular here. You can randomize character stats, randomize their initial gear, and change Rex's starting level, in my case 99. Also, 2 challenge flags, you know the drill. Though a solo character challenge sounds kinda interesting. Probably the largest group of settings is about the enemies themselves and can more or less be divided into 2 subsections. The first batch of options all relate to enemy stats. Every single stat randomization can be fine-tuned, and there are some things I changed here compared to the preset's suggestions. With my adjustments, enemies' HP and MP can be between 50 and 200% of the original value, while every other stat can fluctuate between 83.33% and 120%. Notice that each option displays a range, which puts limits on how low or high the responding stat can be. HP can range from 1 to 1 billion, MP from 0 to quad 9, and every other stat from 0 to 255. LP and experience are randomized as well, and thanks to smart orientate themselves on the overall prowess of the enemy. Ranges apply here as well. And before moving on to the second part of the enemy tab, there are some minor settings in between. There are 2 silly flags. And the first allows to randomize the size of enemies based on their stats. If an enemy has high HP, strength, vitality, defense, magic resist or attack power, they grow in size. If one has high MP, magic, speed or evasion, they shrink. Sounds pretty funny. The other silly flag randomizes enemy names. I do not know to what extent that happens, like if enemies just get names from other enemies, or if they get something completely random as the name. Either way, I find stuff like that distracting, so I left it off. Next to the silly flags is the option to buff enemies in trial mode. I am not sure whether I would even want to do trial mode or not, but I boosted enemies there by 30%. Or at least I think that's what it does, because it reads 1.3%, but I guess it means multiplied by 1.3. Everything else would seem kinda low, but I don't know. With the stats out of the way, the second big set of settings regards enemy drops, steals and poaches. These three types of item sources from enemies behave the same way. All are based on the enemy's HP, and in general, loots have higher chances to be obtained compared to, say, weapons, armors and similar. Monograph and Canopic Jar drops can be randomized as well and follow the same principles, though you do get the option to randomize the chance for those kinds of drops to happen. Enemies' respective Monograph and Canopic Jar types can be randomized as well, but I didn't do that. Those drops are randomized anyways, so I like to have at least a little bit of predictability there, which might affect planning slightly. Completing the enemy randomization is the randomization of elemental properties of the enemies themselves, e.g. their weaknesses, resistances, etc. The way it concretely works should be known by now, 5% chance for each additional element. One CP mode sounds absolutely awful, so let's not talk about that. Status effects allow to fine-tune the status effects that can be assigned to weapons, armors and enemy abilities. Generally, there are three classes of status effect properties which can be adjusted here: on-equip effects, on-hit effects and immunities. Since the randomizer allows you to assign every single status effect to either of these categories, I made a lot of personal changes here, since otherwise you end up with some pretty stupid stuff. I talk about things like pieces of armor that have statuses like sleep, disable or stop as on-equip effects, basically rendering them completely useless. Or immunities against buffs like protect and bravery, to just name a few ridiculous possibilities. To keep things reasonable and not overly annoying, I came up with the following settings. On-equip statuses are mostly buffs. Some negative effects are mixed in, but only ones which do not shut the equipper completely down, like oil, slow and blind. On-hit effects are only debuffs. Reflect is mixed in because of its ambiguous nature. Immunities can also only be debuffs, plus reflect for the same reason. You might have noticed that you can also adjust the weight of each individual status within each class. Weight serves as a way to further fine-tune these settings. Basically, the higher the weight of a status compared to the others, the higher the chance that specific status gets assigned instead of one of the lower ones. The weight value does not translate to a direct percentage, aka 100 doesn't mean that status gets assigned 100% of the time. Rather, they work off of each other. As you can see, the weight of all the statuses I have activated is 100 for all of them, meaning every status should have the same odds to be chosen. That's it for the status effect section, though there is something else I want to mention here, in case you want to tinker around here as well. There is like a little bug in the randomizer here, at least something odd I noticed when I was testing. But it seems as if reverse, disable and immobilize are mixed up with poison, silence and zap respectively. Like when I turned off disable as on-equip effect, it would still randomize armor with disable on-equip, which obviously shouldn't be the case. Then trying the same with disable enabled and silence disabled fixed the issue. Not sure what exactly is happening there, but be wary when changing things here. Something seems to be mixed up. Heading over to shops, we can see that I decided to not randomize the shops in the game. This yet again serves as a measure to maintain progression. Early shops sell early items, and as you make your way through the game, you unlock more and more powerful stuff. The Bible items themselves have randomized properties anyways, so I find this approach to be reasonable without ruining the randomizer aspect. It also ensures that you have reliable sources for basic consumables, like potions or phoenix stones. If you want to randomize shops, you can forbid them to sell OP and expensive items, and define what those are. Or you go entirely without any shops, your choice. The Bazaar, on the other hand, I wanted to make very randomized. The items which each Bazaar good contains are randomized, and so are the loot requirements to unlock them. Bazaar goods can contain items, weapons, armors, or even abilities usually worth more than 51,915 gil. though the usual price is supposed to be around 100,000 gil. Required loot quantities are randomized as well, but can never exceed 10. Treasures can be randomized as well, but like the shops, I decided against it. Randomized treasure chests can yield all kinds of stuff, even with restrictions in place. Depending on when you get a diamond armlet-like effect, you might also manage to acquire very powerful things early, which breaks the entire experience. And that's what I wanted to prevent. There are a lot of options here though, if you want to randomize them anyways. Like, you can adjust the potential gil amounts, the worth of all 4 kinds of items you can pull from a chest, and so on. Note that there will be no one-time chests anymore when you activate Treasure Randomizer. With my settings though, there should be still some. Good, Reward Randomizer should also go by fairly quickly. Rewards from hunts and basically side quests can be randomized. With my settings, those tasks will only give items, no gil. Also, if there are some empty reward slots, it will give me teleport stones, which is nice. Speaking of teleport stones, those could be tricky to get in Randomizer, since there doesn't have to be an easy accessible source available for them. So that could be interesting or a pain in the butt. Anyways, this section is quite straightforward, let's move on to the licenses. Having randomized equipment and abilities so far, it is only logical that the licenses for these can be randomized as well, starting with the Augment licenses. For reference, those are things like potion or battle lores, and similar to the magics, the randomizer also adds new ones, particularly certain augments that normally are only on equipment. The Treasure Hunter augment from the Diamond Armlet is a good example. You also get the option to include bad augments on the license board. No XP to name one. How about no? The equipment and ability licenses are randomized, and the number of equipment/abilities per license is randomized as well. Mixing equipment and abilities across types is possible, but turned off. Lastly, the required license points to unlock a license depend on what the license unlocks, similar to equipment and item prices. Detailed changes about the augment licenses can be done in the corresponding tab. All augments have specific ranges keeping their effects in check, and they are all based around a certain standard value. I left everything here as is. And with that, it is time for the final batch of settings, the license board tab. Immediately you are greeted by 3 special flags, that each offer unique settings regarding the license boards. The first option allows to play with a single license board that contains all licenses and is universally shared by all jobs, like the good old PS2 days. Random maze layouts generates license boards that are only one tile wide and essentially force you to unlock one license after another. Such license boards should be familiar to people who have played the Struggle for Freedom mod, since they are basically the struggle variant of the license boards found there. Another good comparison is the sphere grid from Final Fantasy X. If you like those, go ahead. The last special flag allows you to give some theming to the license boards, by forcing some kind of specialization upon them. Specialized boards ensures that each job has access to all licenses of at least 2 types, say swords and black magic for example. Everything else will be up to chance, but those groups of licenses would be completely covered by the board. If you want to take it a step further, also activate Specialization Only, which limits the boards to only all licenses of 2 groups without anything else. And could be interesting if you want to use 2 jobs per character, but think it would be too OP otherwise. For the sake of my playthrough, I will not be playing with either the single or maze boards, though I keep the light specialization. Continuing, there is a funny option which assigns all jobs new names depending on what is on their license boards, and an option to show suggestions which character should get which job, though you do not have to follow suit with those. Next is probably the most important setting in this section, the randomization of the licenses themselves. The 3 options below allow for some specifications of the overall license randomization, by forcing the randomizer to place all accessory, gambit, and Esper licenses on every board. I fully agree with the guaranteed Esper and especially gambit placements, but disabled the accessories to spice things up. Low to high once again serves a way to keep a sense of progress by building the license boards based on LP costs, starting with low amounts near the initially unlocked Essentials field and becoming continuously more expensive. That only leaves the Randomize Layout option, which generates entirely new license boards based on the previous settings. So much for the settings. As I mentioned near the start, if you want to play with the exact same settings that I am using, you can find my flex string inside a paste bin linked to in the video description. Just copy and paste it and my settings should be all there. All that's left then is to click randomize and apply the generated patch to the game, which can either be done in one go or split into two separate steps. In any case, the randomizer always generates a folder which contains basically everything it has randomized, usually within the main randomizer folder itself. It should be named FF12 Randomized followed by a number. You can consult this folder if you want to look anything up about your seed, be it treasures, enemy stats or equipment properties. All that info can be found in the documentation.html file. On top of that, there are also some explanations available in-game, via the clan primer, or as the randomizer calls it, Rando Primer, regarding some of the randomizer's basic principles. With that, I hope you enjoyed my little tour through the Final Fantasy XII randomizer. Hopefully I was able to explain each option in an understandable way and explain my reasoning behind my modifications of the controlled random preset. Again, quick disclaimer, all of this is based on my understanding of things. Not everything has to be the exact way as I described it. Please bear that in mind and correct me if I was wrong about something and you know better. And before I conclude this video, however, I want to shine a spotlight on 3 other mods I will be using throughout my playthrough. The Insurgent's Manifesto, the Insurgent's Itemized Bazaar, and the Insurgent's Descriptive Inventory, all of which are developed by Xeavin. These 3 mods are very useful utilities that should streamline the overall experience. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but Manifesto introduces several quality of life features. Itemized Bazaar allows me to see the required loot for randomized bazaar goods, and Descriptive Inventory depicts more detailed information about equipment, abilities and items. There seems to be a conflict between the randomizer and Descriptive Inventory though, since both alter the way item descriptions are displayed. It is nothing major, but the randomizer descriptions apparently take priority there, and I would much rather have the Descriptive Inventory ones, so I'm trying to fix that. If you want an in-depth breakdown of the Insurgent mods, you can find links to them in the video description. And nice, with all that out of the way, I am looking forward to the playthrough. I hope it will turn out as intended and be very interesting. Once again, thanks to Bartz24 for the randomizer and Xeavin for the awesome utilities. Don't forget to check out the video description, it contains all relevant information and resources. If you have some questions or remarks, always feel free to post them in the comments. I will try to help where I can. Otherwise, thanks for watching and I hope I see you in the first real episode of this project. I'm looking forward to it. Take care.